The pen was already waiting for me when I walked in. It lay in the center of the long walnut table like a blade polished for my throat. My mother did not raise her voice. That was what made it worse. Margaret Brooks only looked at me across the chandelier light and said, with the calm precision of someone arranging flowers, "You have never been someone this family could trust with its name." For a second, no one moved. Not my father. Not my sister. Not the lawyer at the head of the table. Not the relatives seated along both sides of the room in their pressed clothes and careful silence. The old house in Savannah had always been beautiful in a severe, expensive way, all carved wood and gleaming silver and portraits that seemed to watch you breathe. That afternoon, it felt less like home and more like a courtroom where the verdict had been decided before I arrived. I should have turned around the moment I saw Harold Wren standing beside my father with a thick folder in his hand. I should have known from the way Vivian sat there, spine straight, cream silk dress untouched by a single wrinkle, that this was not a conversation. It was a ceremony. An execution with linen napkins and crystal glasses. My father, Charles Brooks, did not even offer me a seat. He only glanced toward the empty chair at the far end of the table. The message was clear. You are here because we need your signature. Nothing more. I sat anyway. Slowly. Quietly. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my face stayed still. That had always unsettled my family most. They knew how to handle tears. They knew how to dismiss anger. Silence made them nervous. Harold opened the folder and began reading in that dry legal voice that could turn a human life into a stack of paper. The Brooks Hospitality Trusts. The preserved estate holdings. The waterfront property on Tybee Island. The equity distributions from the family hotel group. Every word landed with cold, methodical force. Every asset. Every account. Every right of control. Transferred to Vivian Brooks. Not shared. Not divided. Given. I looked at my sister. She did not smile. Vivian was too disciplined for that. But satisfaction still moved across her face, faint and bright as a knife catching light. She kept her hands folded on the table, the picture of composure, though I could almost hear the triumph humming beneath her skin. She had always worn victory like perfume. Never too much. Just enough for everyone nearby to notice. And me? I was given a relinquishment document. A clean set of signature tabs. A final chance to make their cruelty efficient. My mother leaned back in her chair, eyes cool, almost relieved. To her, this was not betrayal. It was correction. She had spent years trying to sand me down into something more acceptable, more measurable, more like the daughter she could explain proudly over dinner. But I had chosen restoration work over corporate law. Old buildings over balance sheets. Dust, scaffolding, cracked plaster, forgotten beauty over polished status. In my mother's world, passion without obvious prestige was just failure with better lighting. Your work is charming, Eliana, she said softly. But charm does not protect legacy. Across from her, my aunt lowered her gaze. My uncle shifted in his seat and said nothing. My father stood rigid as stone, one hand resting on the back of his chair. He looked almost bored, but I knew him too well. Beneath that stillness was fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of anything he could not value on paper. Then there was the twist that cut deepest. On the wall behind Vivian hung a series of framed family photographs. Vivian at her graduation. Vivian beside my father at the opening of the Brooks Grand. Vivian on the arm of my mother at a charity gala, radiant and chosen. I stared at them for one long breath and realized something so brutal it hollowed me out from the inside. There was not a single picture of me in the room. Not one. I felt the truth move through me then, slow and sharp. This was not the day they stopped loving me. This was only the day they decided to stop hiding it. Harold slid the pen toward my hand. I picked it up. For the first time, my father really looked at me. Perhaps he expected pleading. Perhaps my mother expected outrage. Perhaps Vivian wanted the satisfaction of watching me break. Instead, I signed every page with a steady hand. The silence after that was almost holy. I rose from the table, pushed the papers back toward the lawyer, and met each face one by one. My mother looked triumphant. My father looked strangely pale. My sister looked almost disappointed, as if my calm had stolen something she had planned to keep forever. When I reached the front door, rain was striking the glass in silver lines. Behind me, the house remained bright, polished, full of people who thought they had witnessed the end of my story. They had not. They had only mistaken rejection for power. Outside, the storm swallowed me whole. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in wet air and the bitter taste of loss, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not dead. Not broken. Just silent. Deep water silent. I had walked into that house as the daughter they could erase. I walked out carrying something they had never bothered to see. Not money. Not protection. Something far more dangerous. I knew how to build beauty from ruins. The first thing they took from me was money. The second was far more precise. They took the air around my name. 3 days after I walked out of the Brooks house, I sat at the scarred wooden table in my apartment in Charleston, revising a restoration proposal for a 19th-century townhouse with water damage and collapsing crown molding. Outside, the afternoon light spilled across the brick buildings in soft gold, but inside my kitchen, everything felt gray. My coffee had gone cold. My shoulders ached. Still, I worked. Work was the only thing that made the room feel solid. Then my phone rang. It was the townhouse client. Her tone was so careful it felt rehearsed. She apologized twice before she reached the point. They had decided to go in another direction. She said it was not about my portfolio. Not about my vision. Just timing. Just circumstances. Just a feeling that they needed someone more stable right now. More stable. After the call ended, I sat motionless, staring at the sketches spread across the table. My own reflection looked back at me from the dark screen of my laptop, pale and still, like someone waiting to be told what part of her life would be removed next. The second cancellation came 4 days later. Then another. Then a developer who had sounded eager a week earlier suddenly stopped replying altogether. Each conversation used the same soft language, the same vague concern, the same invisible wall sliding into place between me and the life I was trying to hold together. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Charleston was competitive. Clients changed their minds. Projects fell apart. That happened. But by the second week, coincidence began to smell like perfume on a lie. I cut every expense I could. I stopped ordering takeout. I stopped replacing things that broke. I stretched soup over 2 meals, then 3. At night, I sat on the floor with old ledgers, calculating how long I could survive if no one hired me for anything larger than a paint consultation. The answer was not comforting. What frightened me most was not the numbers. It was the silence. No one said my work was bad. No one said I had failed. They simply stepped back from me as if my name had become risky to touch. One rainy Thursday, I called my Uncle Daniel. He had always been the gentlest of the Brooks family, the one who used to ask about my drawings when everyone else asked about returns and rankings. I told myself he might at least know someone with a small preservation project. A storefront. A carriage house. Anything. He answered on the 4th ring. Eliana, he said, and already there was caution in his voice. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for rescue. I only asked for a connection. One introduction. One chance. Silence pressed against my ear. Then he exhaled, low and tired. I am sorry, sweetheart. I cannot get involved. Cannot or will not, I asked. Another silence. This one heavier. Behind him I could hear the clink of ice in a glass, the low murmur of a television, the ordinary sounds of a man sitting safely inside a life that would continue untouched. "It is complicated," he said. "No," I replied. "It is simple. You are choosing a side." I ended the call before he could answer. That Saturday, I took my laptop to a small cafe near the harbor because the walls of my apartment felt too close. I was reviewing salvage stone suppliers when a former client named Marissa asked if she could sit with me. She smiled too brightly, stirred her tea even after the sugar had dissolved, then finally leaned in and said, "I need to ask you something, and please do not be angry." A chill slid through me. She told me she had been at a private dinner in Savannah 2 weeks earlier. Vivian had been there. Elegant as ever. Effortless. Controlled. The kind of woman people listen to because she never seemed emotional enough to lie. And sometime between dessert and coffee, she had mentioned me. Not directly. Not cruelly. That was the genius of it. She had sighed and said I was going through something unfortunate. That the family was heartbroken. That there had been issues with judgment, with money, with trust. She had not made an accusation. She had planted a shadow. Then she had let other people walk into it on their own. I felt every muscle in my body go still. Now the cancelled contracts made sense. The hesitation. The polite distance. My sister had not only taken the inheritance. She had stepped carefully behind me and salted the ground. Marissa reached across the table, guilt clouding her face. "I thought you should know." I nodded once. "Thank you." My voice sounded calm. Too calm. Inside, something colder than grief was forming. Grief trembles. This did not. This sharpened. That night, back in my apartment, I opened a new folder on my computer. I named it Evidence. Then I saved every cancellation email, every message, every note from every uneasy conversation I could remember. Not because I knew what I would do with it. Because instinct told me I would need it one day. Near midnight, another email appeared in my inbox. A woman named Josephine Hale wanted to meet about an abandoned theater she had just purchased in New Orleans. She wrote that most people saw decay when they walked through old buildings. She had been told I saw structure, memory, and possibility. I read the message 3 times. Outside, rain tapped softly at the window. Inside, my half-empty apartment smelled like paper, dust, and stubbornness. I should have felt afraid. Instead, for the first time in weeks, I felt something almost dangerous. Not hope. Direction. The theater looked like a corpse the first time I saw it. Rainwater had stained the velvet walls in long brown tears. Plaster hung from the ceiling in broken curls. The stage sagged at the center like it had finally grown tired of pretending it could still hold anything beautiful. Dust floated through the beams of afternoon light in slow, ghostly spirals, and every step I took across the cracked mosaic floor echoed back at me from a room that had once known applause. Josephine Hale stood in the center aisle with a black umbrella tucked under one arm, as composed as if she were inspecting a finished ballroom instead of a ruin. She was older than I expected, silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, posture straight, eyes sharp enough to make most men lie by reflex. She did not waste time with flattery. She only looked at me and said, "Tell me what everyone else is missing." I did not answer right away. Instead, I walked. I ran my fingertips over the carved plaster columns, traced a waterline along the west wall, crouched near the orchestra pit, and tipped my face up toward the broken dome. Most people entered spaces like this looking for what had died. I had learned to look for what had survived. The original beams were still sound. The balcony curve could still carry sightlines beautifully. The old proscenium arch, though cracked, still had authority. Even the damage was speaking. It was only a question of whether anyone knew how to listen. When I finally turned back to Josephine, she had not moved. "The bones are good," I said. "Everyone is distracted by the rot because rot is dramatic. Structure is quieter." but the structure is still here. This place does not need to be replaced. It needs to be remembered correctly. Something changed in her expression then. Not softness. Interest. Go on, she said. So I did. I told her how I would reopen the ceiling line to reclaim height and light. How I would preserve the original arch instead of ripping it out for something clean and soulless. How the lobby could become intimate instead of grand, warm instead of formal. I spoke about acoustics. Circulation, patina, restraint. I forgot to sound impressive. I forgot to protect myself. For the first time in months, I spoke the way I used to before fear began editing every sentence. Josephine listened without interrupting. When I finished, the theater fell silent around us again, but the silence felt different now. Charged. Awake. Most people come in here talking about what they can impose on a building, she said. You talk about what you can uncover. I swallowed. I was suddenly aware of the damp hem of my coat, the ache in my shoulders, the fact that I had exactly enough money left to cover rent and 1 week of groceries. She studied me another moment. Then she said, I want you to lead the restoration. The words struck so hard I almost did not trust what I heard. This is not charity, Josephine added, as if she had read the thought before it fully formed. I do not rescue people. I invest in precision. If you take this on, I expect discipline, stamina, and results. I lifted my chin. You will have them. The project consumed me. For the next 5 months, I lived inside blueprints, supplier calls, permit revisions, scaffold climbs, and contractor disputes. I learned which floorboards could be saved and which had to be surrendered. I learned how to argue without raising my voice. I learned how to walk through chaos and still see the finished line. Some nights I went home so exhausted I fell asleep in my clothes with plaster dust still clinging to my sleeves. Not everyone wanted me there. Mateo Alvarez, the master artisan hired to restore the stained glass panels above the lobby, took one look at me on the first day and decided I was decorative. Too young. Too female. Too polished, in his opinion, to understand the brutality of real restoration. He answered my questions with half shrugs and thin patience. I let him. Then one morning a delivery arrived with replacement glass cut to the wrong historic profile. The contractor was ready to approve it anyway, eager to save time. Mateo said nothing. He only watched me, waiting. I walked to the crate, lifted one of the pieces, held it to the light, and felt my temper turn clean and cold. No, I said. The contractor blinked. Excuse me, this glass has the wrong ripple density, the wrong tone, and the wrong edge treatment. It will shine like a lie against the original panels. Send it back. The room went still. The contractor started to protest. I cut him off. If you want someone to install shortcuts, hire someone else. If you want this building restored properly, we do it once and we do it right. Mateo looked at me for a long second, then gave a slow nod. It was the first time he had looked at me as if I belonged there. When the theater reopened, it did not feel renovated. It felt resurrected. The old gold detailing glowed again. The velvet walls held warmth instead of decay. Light poured through restored glass and settled across the lobby floor like a blessing. On opening night, guests stood in the doorway and forgot to speak. Some stared upward. Some reached for their phones. Some simply cried. Josephine stood beside me as applause rolled through the restored hall. She did not smile easily, but that night, she did. 3 days later, she invited me to lunch. I expected praise. Maybe another referral. Instead, she slid a folder across the table and said, I am expanding. Boutique hotels. Historic properties. Multi-city restoration. I want a partner with vision, not an employee with talent. I stared at her. For a heartbeat, I saw myself as my family had seen me. Risky. Impractical. Not built for legacy. Then I looked down at the plans inside the folder and saw something truer. They thought I had been left with nothing. They were wrong. I had been left with myself. And that, finally, was starting to look like power. 3 years after my family erased me at a polished table in Savannah, I walked into a ballroom where my name was already waiting for me. Not as a warning. Not as a whisper. As an arrival. The annual Southern Heritage Development Gala occupied the top floor of an old Atlanta hotel that had once been a railway terminal, all vaulted ceilings, burnished brass, and windows so tall the city lights looked like they had been poured upward from the streets below. Everywhere I looked, the room shimmered with practiced power. Men in tailored tuxedos. Women in silk that moved. Like water. Crystal glasses catching amber light. Laughter polished to perfection. The sort of evening my mother had always adored because every inch of it smelled of status. I had almost refused to come. Josephine had not allowed it. "You belong in rooms like this," she had said while fastening the clasp of one pearl earring in the mirror behind me. "The difference now is that you no longer need anyone here to agree." So I came. My dress was black, simple, cut clean through the waist and shoulders. No diamonds. No dramatic entrance. I did not need ornament. Not tonight. My power was no longer something I imagined in secret while surviving off instant soup and second chances. It had weight now. Contracts. Properties. Payroll. Reputation. I carried all of it quietly, like a blade hidden in velvet. Josephine and I had barely crossed the ballroom when I saw them. My father stood near the bar with one hand around a glass of scotch, his posture rigid even in ease. Harold Wren was beside him, silver-haired and immaculate, speaking to a developer I recognized from Birmingham. My mother sat at a round table nearby, wrapped in pale blue silk, smiling that measured social smile she wore when she wanted to look gracious and superior at the same time. And Vivian stood a few feet away from them, surrounded by investors, one hand resting lightly on the stem of a champagne flute, her laugh rising at exactly the right volume to sound effortless. She saw me second. My mother saw me first. Her smile vanished so quickly it was almost violent. The glass in her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. My father followed her stare. I watched recognition move through him in stages. Curiosity. Confusion. Disbelief. Then something much harder to look at. He had expected me to disappear. Vivian turned at last, still smiling from whatever she had just said. The smile froze on her face as though the muscles had forgotten how to move. For one suspended instant, no one in that corner of the room breathed. Then Josephine placed 2 fingers lightly at my elbow and guided me forward. She did not hurry. She never hurried. Power that is real does not rush. "Charles, Margaret," Josephine said warmly when we reached them. "What a pleasure." My mother recovered first. Of course she did. She rose halfway from her chair, eyes already shining with manufactured surprise. "Eliana," she said, as though we had parted on affectionate terms. "What an unexpected delight." I held her gaze. "Good evening, Mother." My father said nothing. Harold Wren looked as if he had seen a ghost who had returned wearing better tailoring than the living. His gaze flicked from me to Josephine and back again, and in that movement I saw calculation begin. Lawyers do not feel shock for long. They reorganize around it. Vivian tilted her head, elegant, controlled, every inch the woman who had once ruined rooms with a few careful sentences. "Eliana," she said softly. "I heard you were doing some preservation work." "How nice. How nice." The old condescension slid across the words like oil over glass. For a moment the ballroom disappeared, and I was back in that dining room with the pen, the documents, the portraits that had left no place for me. Then Josephine answered before I could. "Preservation work," she repeated, her voice smooth as dark satin. "That is one way to describe a woman who just closed a multi-state restoration portfolio worth more than $7 million this year alone." The silence that followed was exquisite. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sharp enough to cut through every nearby conversation. Two men standing by the bar turned. A woman from a Charleston development group actually inhaled. Someone behind us set down a glass too hard. Vivian did not move, but all the color drained from her face. My father looked at me fully then. Really looked. Not at the daughter he had dismissed. Not at the family problem he had signed away. At the woman standing in front of him with Josephine Hale at her side and the room slowly adjusting around her. Harold Wren cleared his throat. "Miss Brooks," he said carefully, "I was not aware you and Josephine were in business together." "Partner," Josephine corrected. One word. Calm. Precise. Devastating. My mother tried again, leaning toward me with that softened voice people use when they think gentleness can erase history. "We are so pleased to see you doing well. Darling." I almost admired the performance. "I have done more than well," I said. "And I did it without the protection of this family name." Vivian's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Her expression remained composed, but I could see the fury flickering under her skin now, bright and ugly and terrified. She had always believed the world reflected whatever version of me she chose to describe. Tonight the mirror had turned. I did not stay to argue. That was the part that unsettled them most. I had not come to beg for acknowledgement. I had not come to throw my success in their faces. I had come because I belonged there. That was all. That was enough. Later that night, after Josephine and I left the ballroom and the city wind lifted cool against my bare shoulders, my phone vibrated in my clutch. It was Nolan. His voice, when I answered, was unusually still. "I just got off a routine title verification call," he said. "We are moving on that land parcel outside Savannah. The one bordering Brooks' property." I stopped walking. And there was a pause. Then he said, "I gave Harold Wren your name as principal buyer. Then I disclosed your current asset summary for compliance." The traffic below us hissed over rain-dark pavement. Somewhere behind me, a car door shut. Josephine stood a few feet away, watching my face. "How did he take it?" I asked. Nolan let out a quiet breath. He did not speak for several seconds. Then he asked me to repeat the valuation. I closed my eyes. "Say it, Nolan." "Your estimated holdings now stand at just over $9 million, he said. And by the sound of him, I think I just ruined somebody's night. I looked back through the glass walls of the ballroom. My family was still inside, bathed in gold light, still clinging to the world where they had once believed they controlled the ending. They did not know it yet. But somewhere in that building, Harold Wren was already making a call in a voice I had never heard from him before. Not cold. Panicked. Harold Wren called my father before the gala had fully emptied. I was not in the room when it happened, but later, piece by piece, Nolan reconstructed it for me with the calm precision lawyers use when the facts are sharp enough on their own. Harold had stepped into a quieter corridor, one hand pressed to his ear, the polished certainty drained out of his voice. He told my father the adjacent land parcel outside Savannah was being acquired through one of my holding companies. He told him the financial disclosures had cleared. He told him the valuation attached to my name. Just over $9 million. My father said only one thing at first. "That is impossible." Harold repeated the number. My father said it again, softer this time, as if lowering his voice might make reality more negotiable. "That is impossible." But numbers had always been the only language he truly trusted. And now the language he had worshipped was speaking against him. I should have felt triumph when Nolan told me that. Instead, what moved through me was something quieter. Not revenge. Not even satisfaction. It felt more like a lock inside my chest finally breaking open after years of holding. 2 days later, Nolan called again. This time his voice carried a different kind of weight. "I found the emails," he said. I was sitting alone in my office in Birmingham, late afternoon light slanting across old pine floors, warming the drafting table where half-rolled plans waited for my attention. Outside the window, the city moved in a haze of heat and traffic. Inside, everything went still. Send them. The first message had been written more than 2 years earlier. Vivian had sent it to a property consultant in Charleston who had once considered hiring me for a boutique hotel project. The wording was elegant. Cautious. Poison wrapped in silk. She wrote that while she hated to speak about family matters, she felt a duty to discreetly warn them that I had been cut off after serious concerns involving judgment, financial trust, and professional reliability. She never directly accused me of anything criminal. She was far too careful for that. She simply opened a door and invited suspicion to walk through it. There were 4 more. Different recipients. Same tone. Same tactic. She had scattered doubt the way some people scatter seeds, quietly, methodically, trusting other people to grow the damage for her. I read every line once. Then again. By the 3rd email, my hands were no longer shaking. They were steady. That frightened me more than anger would have. Nolan let me sit with the silence before speaking. It is enough, he said. More than enough. Interference with business relationships. Defamation risk. Intent can be argued from the pattern alone. I stared at the final message, at my sister's polished sign-off, at the delicate little phrases meant to look concerned instead of cruel. I could almost see her writing them, chin lifted, expression serene, convinced no consequence would ever reach her because she had learned from our mother how to wound without raising her voice. "What do you want to do?" Nolan asked. The old version of me would have answered immediately. Hurt speaks fast. Power does not. I took the evening. Then the night. I walked through every room of my home with the emails printed in my hand, the paper warming slowly against my skin. I thought of the projects I had lost. The rent I had counted in the dark. The meals I had stretched. The humiliation of watching doors close for reasons no one would say aloud. I thought of my father signing me away. My mother calling it legacy. Vivian smiling with clean hands while my life bled out in private. By morning, my answer was clear. I will not sue, I told Nolan. Not now. He was quiet for a beat. Are you sure? Yes. A lawsuit would drag me back into their gravity. It would turn my life into evidence and my healing into a spectacle. I did not rebuild myself just to hand my piece back to them in legal filings. So what do you want instead? A line, I said. One they cannot cross again. Nolan understood immediately. The cease and desist letter went out that afternoon. Precise. Clinical. Merciless in its restraint. It cited every documented instance of professional interference. Attached the email chain. Demanded an immediate halt to any false or misleading communication about me or my companies. It did not beg. It did not threaten theatrically. It simply made one thing unmistakable. I was no longer the woman they could injure without consequence. 3 days later, Vivian called. I looked at her name glowing on my screen and felt nothing dramatic. No surge of rage. No shaking breath. Only distance. I let it ring out. My mother tried next. Then my father. Then, 2 evenings later, a handwritten note arrived through Nolan's office. My father's writing looked older than I remembered, the lines less confident, the pressure uneven. I was wrong, it said. I see that now. I folded the note once and placed it in my desk drawer. Seeing me now was easy. The world had translated my worth into figures he could finally respect. But where had that sight been when I had only talent? When I had only conviction? When all I owned was craft, grit, and the stubborn refusal to disappear? A week later, Josephine invited me to walk the newly cleared parcel outside Savannah, the one my company had acquired. The afternoon sun lay warm over the grass. Pine trees lifted dark against the sky. In the distance, the edge of my family's old world sat behind gates and memory, close enough to cast a shadow, too far now to touch me. Josephine stopped beside me and looked over the land. "So," she asked, "what will you build?" For a moment I thought of everything pain had taught me to make. Walls. Distance. Silence. Then I thought of the young artisans I had met over the past 3 years. Brilliant people with raw hands and impossible ideas. Women dismissed in meetings. Men without connections. Designers, preservationists, craftsmen, all standing outside locked doors, waiting for someone to decide they were worthy. "I know exactly what I will build," I said. It would not be a mansion. Not a trophy. Not a monument built to make my family choke on regret. It would be a place where overlooked people could begin. Studios. Workshops. Shared drafting rooms. Mentorship. Space for talent before the world knew what to call it. A door. The kind no one had opened for me. That night, back home, I stood by the window with Savannah far behind me and my future spread wide ahead. My phone lit once more with a final message from Vivian. "Can we talk?" I read it twice. Then I typed 4 words and sent them before I could overthink the mercy in them. "I forgive you. Goodbye." The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. If you had lived through what Eliana did, would you have taken the case to court or drawn the same line and walked forward instead? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, if you believe the quietest people can build the strongest lives, like this video, subscribe, and stay with Still Waters Payback for the next story.